The transfer portal window has officially closed for this offseason, and while some college football programs are picking up the pieces, Notre Dame is over here sipping a cocktail on the porch. No panic, no chaos, just upgrades. That's next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And today is Wednesday, April 30th. And thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. Before we get rolling, please remember to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you might be tuning in today. This episode is presented by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Folks, the time has finally come. College football's spring transfer portal window has officially closed after about 10 days of activity, and for the first time in a long time, coaches across the country can take a collective deep breath. Graduate transfers can still enter at any time. I should point that out. But for now, it is safe to say that the bulk of the portal movement is behind us, at least until December. But that is a long way from today. And now that the dust has settled, we could take a full look at Notre Dame's portal activity. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We'll go over who's out, who's in, and most importantly, why Notre Dame's roster actually got better this offseason. Then we're going to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and really try to figure out why Marcus Freeman has this program in one of the most stable positions in the entire country, and that's reflected in their portal strategy. But let's go through everyone that Notre Dame lost, or maybe more accurately, what they didn't lose, because now that it's all said and done, we can definitively say that they did not lose a single projected 2025 starter, because some of these guys maybe could have started later on down the line, but as we look at this season, they did not lose a single guy who's projected to start. They lost 13 total guys from their roster, but only a small handful of them logged legitimate playing time this past season. I think the most notable departure is the quarterback, Steve Angeli. He played well when his number was called, but was clearly behind Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr in terms of his long-term ceiling. He went into spring practice as like the first guy up in the three-man competition just because he had been around the longest. But even though I felt like he had the highest floor of any of the three guys in the room, talent ultimately won out in this situation. I think we all kind of saw the writing on the wall by the time the spring game came around, so it wasn't really a surprise that he left. I'm sure Notre Dame would have liked to keep him on in case of emergency. It'd be great to have on a quarterback who's been around the program that long, and he would be a leader in that locker room to some extent. But he made the smart decision to leave. I think Notre Dame was very honest with him so that he could go out and look for a different opportunity. Now that he's going to get his degree from the University of Notre Dame, he's going to have 2 more years of eligibility with Syracuse. That's where he ultimately committed to, and it's a great opportunity for him because they're going to throw the ball a ton. They led the nation in passing offense last year with Kyle McCord as their quarterback. So Steve Angeli is definitely going to get a chance to showcase what he's capable of, and he's even going to get a chance at revenge against Notre Dame on Senior Day. That is going to be a very juicy storyline. But they also lost a couple of receivers way back during the winter portal cycle, and Jane Thomas and Deion Colzie. Thomas ended up at Virginia, so now it's like a 1-for-1 trade with Malachi Fields, and I think it's safe to say Notre Dame won that one. More on Fields in segment 2, and Colzie ended up at Miami, Ohio. Thomas was a good player at Notre Dame 2 years ago. It felt like he was going to be wide receiver 1, but last year he only had 18 catches for 167 yards, and he was healthy throughout that season. We saw his role kind of disintegrate as the year went on, but he would still come in. Like, he had a touchdown in the college football playoff, and he was a great leader for this team. But I think he may, best case scenario, he might have been like the 5th or 6th guy in the rotation this year, and Colzie was just going to come in garbage time. They had their biggest loss in terms of the quantity of the guys in that room on the offensive line when they lost Rocco Spindler, Pat Coogan, Sam Pendleton, and Ty Chan. And even though I don't think Coogan nor Spindler would start this year, losing them stings, because if they had stayed, Notre Dame would have, without a doubt, the deepest offensive line in the country. Their starting 5 is still going to be excellent with Anthony Knapp, Billy Schrouth, probably Ashton Craig or Sullivan Absher, Charles Jagasaw, and Emil Wagner. But as we saw last year, you do need good backups. But what does it say about Notre Dame's offensive line that these three guys would leave, and it's not a massive loss because Rocco Spindler is going to start at Nebraska, and Pat Coogan is going to start at Indiana, and Sam Pendleton is probably going to start at Tennessee. So those are three players who would be backup offensive linemen at Notre Dame, but they're going to start for Power 4 teams this season, including two teams who were in the college football playoff last season. So even though it's a bummer to lose those guys, and I'm going to certainly miss Pat Coogan's pregame speeches, that's just kind of the reality of the situation in the Notre Dame offensive line room. They left because they knew that they were not guaranteed a starting spot. Rocco Spindler could have potentially won a job, but he didn't want to risk it, and he's probably getting paid a lot more money at Nebraska where he's guaranteed to start, as opposed to at Notre Dame where you can only pay your backup offensive lineman so much money. On the defensive line, they lost Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobira, not impact players, so that's not a loss, either one of those guys. And then at quarterback, they lost Jaden Mickey during the middle of last season, and he had experience, but he also got passed up by a true freshman and Leonard Moore in the middle of the season. And we saw, as we saw Leonard Moore play more, it was very clear that Jaden Mickey was never, ever, ever going to beat out Leonard Moore. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. And once it became clear that Moore would start in place of Christian Gray for that Louisville game, I believe it was, when he was actually training at boundary corner, but then they're like, we actually want you to play field corner in that game, Mickey realized it's just not going to work out for him. And then you look at Carson Hobbs and his ascension in that cornerback room. So there just really was never a spot for Mickey going forward. He committed to Cal and then ultimately flipped to Boise State. So he's also going to have a revenge game in South Bend. But I have a feeling that Notre Dame is not going to be afraid to throw his way. At safety, Kennedy Urlacher, the only other spring transfer of any legitimate consequence. Urlacher would have been a factor on special teams again this season, and maybe in a year or two, he could be a rotational player on the defense. Like, he looked really good in that Purdue game, and I think that he's one of those guys that's just a good football player, even though he's a little bit undersized. But he wanted to play now, and Chad Bowden offered him the opportunity to play at USC, and it's a great opportunity for Kennedy. He gets to go play for a place that's closer to home. He's going to have a chance to get on the field right away. And you know what? Good for Chad Bowden, because he got one Notre Dame player who took him up on his offer to leave South Bend to come to LA. Urlacher was certainly not the only player that Bowden tried to poach away from the Notre Dame roster, but he's the only one that he got. So congrats to him. He got one. Specialists, Notre Dame lost Zach Yoakum, Reno Monteforte. I'm not sure what the interest level is going to be for either one of these guys. Zach Yoakum was the backup kicker. I guess he did pretty good as a kickoff guy in some spots. And, Reno was the long snapper on a team that went to the national championship, but he was getting beat out. We saw that in the spring game. But hey, Reno did come through for the Irish in the college football playoff semifinal. They had to kick a game-winning field goal. It takes a long snapper, it takes the holder, and it takes the kicker to execute. And all three guys did their job in that play, as well as all the other linemen. So from that standpoint, Reno will always be a legend in terms of Notre Dame long snapping lore. And I understand that some people can look at this and they're saying, oh, well, like Kennedy Urlacher could have contributed down the road. Same with Jaden Mickey and the offensive linemen. Like, losing that many guys still can hurt your depth. What if injuries pile up? The offensive line attrition is concerning. Like, if you share those concerns, I get it. But Notre Dame has strong offensive line depth anyway. Like, they have Gerby Lambert, who's going to be the first tackle off the bench, who some people think can be a first-round NFL draft pick in the future. And he honestly would have had a chance to win the job this fall had he not gotten hurt in the spring. Maybe he earns a starting job as the season goes along. And then on the interior, you've got Sullivan Absher, who could come in at either guard spot. He would be a starter on a lot of other teams around the country, but he really wants to win a starting job at Notre Dame. He's going to have a chance to do it in the fall. Maybe he can beat out Ashton Craig as he comes back from his injury. But the rest of these guys were backups, and they got beat out by other backups. And portal attrition is normal now. And honestly, Notre Dame's 13 losses, it ranks significantly low compared to schools like Auburn, who had well over 20. USC had like 22, including multiple starters. Miami, Florida, who Notre Dame opens the season against, they had more than 18. Ohio State lost 15 guys. And history tells us that the players who leave Notre Dame aren't going to do a lot at their next stop. Like, think about a guy like Tobias Merriweather, transit from Notre Dame, has a ton of raw ability. He's already in the portal again after one season at Cal. Holden Stays looked like a tight end with a lot of promise. He went back to the portal after one disappointing season with Tennessee. Rico Flores didn't do much for UCLA last year. Now, granted, he was hurt. Braylon James did nothing for TCU. Clarence Lewis was fine at Syracuse. Certainly played a lot more there than he would have at Notre Dame last season, so I understand why he left. but he gave up the game-winning touchdown against Stanford last season. And you could even go back to like when Everett Golson left for Florida State or Malik Zaire left for Florida. They didn't do much of anything at their next stop. This has been a trend. We've seen it year over year now, and Notre Dame did not lose anyone that it couldn't afford to in this offseason. And unlike most programs right now, they didn't have to scramble to fill emergency holes either. This isn't roster management. This is roster control. As for what they added, that's where it gets really interesting, though. So coming up next, we're going to break down Notre Dame's very impressive hit rate with transfers under Marcus Freeman and why this year's class could be the best yet. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. So if the departures were just manageable, I think the additions were strategic and in some cases huge. Notre Dame didn't just replace depth, they found players who are going to contribute in a big way right away. Now, this offseason, they didn't have to go out and get Riley Leonard, the big-name quarterback, or they didn't have to go out and get Sam Hartman. Those are two of the biggest names in the portal each of the last two cycles, but now that Notre Dame is going with a homegrown quarterback, they don't have quite the star power that they have brought in the past, but still, they have some very talented guys, and the fact that Notre Dame was in the midst of a college football playoff run, I think took away from some of the intrigue with these prospects, so I think it's worth revisiting, specifically Malachi Fields, because he is a true wide receiver one option for Notre Dame. And even though like Notre Dame fans aren't as excited about him as some other teams are about their transfer additions, I think Malachi Fields has a chance to be really, really good this season. So he has the perfect size to be a boundary wide receiver, 6'4", 220 pounds. Last year in 2024, he had 55 receptions, 808 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And as we saw in that game between Notre Dame and Virginia, he didn't really have a whole lot to work with at quarterback. Like, it was a disaster watching the Virginia quarterback situation. They tried to go in with two different guys. Honestly, the backup ended up playing a little bit better in that game. But the fact that he was able to generate those kind of stats, given his quarterback situation, is very impressive. And he basically had the same level of output in 2023 when he had 58 receptions, 811 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. But I think the most surprising thing, when you think about what Malachi Fields could be at Notre Dame, recently, I started to look at some of those way too early mock drafts, and look, I understand a lot of those times they're just there to get engagement because idiots like me are going to look at them. But Malachi Fields, in one CBS way too early mock, is the 8th overall pick, okay? PFF says he's the number 3 returning wide receiver in the entire country. So on one hand, yeah, these things can be a little extreme, and they're certainly wrong plenty of times, but if he's in that kind of company, odds are he's going to be pretty good. And I actually think the issue is Notre Dame fans are, I guess, they're so cautious to get their hopes up about a transfer wide receiver, or really any wide receiver in general at Notre Dame, because we have gotten our hopes up about wide receivers, and then it just didn't really pan out. I think last year there was a lot of hype and a lot of intrigue about Chris Mitchell because he had over 1,000 receiving yards for Florida International. He was considered a speedster, and he was going to really take the top off defenses, and that just never happened with Notre Dame. He was still a decent wide receiver, but he was more of like a possession guy. And Bo Collins, who I think most fans were like, okay, looking at what he did at Clemson, it was never that great, never jumped off the page. I feel like he basically replicated that at Notre Dame, where he had like a good season, but you wanted a little bit more. Still, he came through with the touchdown against Georgia to put him up and had the biggest catch of the game in that last drive to score the go-ahead touchdown against Texas A&M. Like, he came up big in a few key spots. So from that standpoint, it was a hit. And I think Malachi Fields is by far and away the best transfer wide receiver that Notre Dame has picked up in years. And then they also brought in Will Pauling from Wisconsin, who is at worst wide receiver number 4 on this offense. And yeah, his stats last season weren't that great. 42 catches, 407 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But they also didn't have a quarterback because Wisconsin went out and they got Tyler Van Dyke in the transfer portal, but then he ended up getting hurt and he missed the entire season. So if you go back to 2023, when they actually had a quarterback, oh, and by the way, Mike Brown was the wide receivers coach for Wisconsin at the time, Pauling put up 74 catches, 837 yards, and 6 touchdowns. That's actually better statistically than any season Malachi Fields has had. So I think he's another very underrated guy. And I think the difference between Pauling and Fields compared to what Notre Dame brought in last year, like, yeah, Chris Mitchell put up a bunch of numbers, but it was at Florida International. Bo Collins didn't put up quite the same level of output that either Pauling or Fields did when he was at Clemson. So these guys have a chance to be big impact players for the Irish offense this year. And then at tight end, Notre Dame went out and they got Ty Washington. He's tight end 2 for this offense. He probably would have been tight end 3 had Cooper Flanagan not gotten hurt, but now Notre Dame really needs him. He's more of a blocker than he is a receiver. He didn't put up a ton of stats when he was with the Razorbacks, had 14 catches, 212 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns in his career. But I noticed that when he got kicked off the team, and by the way, it's still so crazy that Notre Dame went out and got a guy who was kicked off the team for an SEC school. But hey, as long as he stays eligible at Notre Dame, I hope it works out for him, obviously. But I noticed that when he left, Arkansas fans were pretty upset because they thought he was a really talented player that wasn't getting used properly in their offensive scheme. Like, he did block well, but fans wanted him to get the ball more because it felt like whenever he got the ball in his hands, good things happened. I mean, he had only 14 catches in his career. Before them, went for touchdowns. So he could be a guy who surprises all of us once he joins the team in the summer and then really gets to showcase his skills in fall camp. Then you flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. They got Jared Dawson, who's going to be a starting D tackle. I feel pretty confident about that. Maybe, before spring practice, I was like, is he more like D tackle 3, but I think at this point he has shown that he's going to be a starter. He had 7 tackles for loss and 4 sacks last year for Louisville, was one of the best players on Louisville's defense in that game against Notre Dame. He's 6'1", 300 pounds, and just a grown man in the middle of that defense. And he's not going to have the flashy numbers of some of like the high-end defensive ends that were in the transfer portal, but his numbers are solid for his position, and he feels a massive need for this Notre Dame team after they lost Howard Cross and Riley Mills. They also added Elijah Hughes, the defensive tackle from USC, who is more of a rotational piece. I think he's probably the 5th or 6th defensive tackle on the depth chart right now because you've got Dawson, you've got Rubio, you've got Onye now, you've got Donovan Heinisch, and I think Elijah Hughes is 5th at best, maybe 6th if Armel Mukum takes a step forward, but Hughes has 2 years of eligibility remaining. He has great length, and he honestly has a pretty high ceiling considering the fact that he hasn't produced a ton yet at the college level, and that's why Notre Dame went out and got him. But one of the more quiet names that we haven't talked about a lot, but is definitely going to be a huge part of this Notre Dame defense next year, is Devontae Smith, starting nickel from Alabama, the very first player to announce that he was going to transfer to Notre Dame. And the timing of it was funny because it felt like Notre Dame was trying to keep all of that under wraps while they were preparing for that first-round game against Indiana. And then kind of out of nowhere, it's like, yeah, Alabama's starting nickel is going to transfer to Notre Dame. And you're like, Alabama defensive back transferring to Notre Dame? Like, that's a pretty big deal. But then, more guys came in and you kind of forgot about it after the playoff run. But he is one of the most talked about players on the Notre Dame roster, or he was at least during the winter workouts and all that. He really, really impressed. He's a grown man playing nickel, which is exactly what Notre Dame wants at the position. He had 30 tackles, a tackle for loss, forced fumble, and 5 pass breakups last year with the Crimson Tide. He was the best player on that defense in the game against LSU when they just dominated the Tigers in Tiger Stadium. He's a very physical player who brings a ton of experience, much like safety Jalen Stroman, who Notre Dame brought over from Virginia Tech. I think he's the starting safety if he's able to stay healthy. He missed all of spring while he recovers from his surgery. But for his career, he has 111 career tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 pass breakups. But I have really high hopes for him. This is not like a Rod Hurd type player. I think he's more physically developed. And even though he hasn't played as many snaps as Rod Hurd, I think he's going to come in and start right away. And if he somehow gets beat out by Luke Tauch or maybe even Tay Johnson, He's absolutely going to be a part of that Notre Dame defense. And then for the specialists, they replaced Mitch Jeter, who was a transfer, with Noah Burnett, transfer from North Carolina. For his career, 71% field goal kicker, has a long of 52, probably going to handle kickoff duties as well. He went 19 of 20 in 2023. So when you look at all these guys and you compare them to the departures that I talked about in segment one, like sure, they didn't add as many guys as they lost in the transfer portal, and none of these guys are like five-star transfers or household names like a Riley Leonard or a Sam Hartman, but they're impact players. Like there's no doubt about it. Every single one of these guys I just mentioned, other than maybe Elijah Hughes, is going to play a key role on this Notre Dame team coming up this year. It's not about fame. It's about fit. It's about function. And Notre Dame didn't need stars. They just needed contributors. And nearly every single guy they've just brought in has at least one full year of starting experience. They fill a role and they fit the locker room. And Marcus Freeman's staff targeted guys who will play, not just warm bodies for the sake of adding talent. I do think there are some programs around the country that they're just like taking in a bunch of guys to make it seem like they're bringing in this influx of talent. But I think like Colorado, for example, proved that you can bring in a ton of transfers, but there's also a reason why some of these guys are in the portal to begin with. And Notre Dame's hit rate on transfers under Marcus Freeman has been really impressive. The Georgia game in the college football playoff was a perfect example. Every single transfer felt like that Notre Dame brought in the previous offseason had a huge moment in that game. Riley Leonard had multiple in that game, but maybe none more than that 3rd and 7 play when he jumped over Malachi Starks, who's now with the Ravens, by the way. R.J. Oben, strip sack. Jane Harrison, kickoff return for a touchdown. Bo Collins scored the touchdown at the end of the first half. Mitch Jeter comes up big with a couple field goals. I mean, the transfers basically won Notre Dame the game, but it wasn't just the Georgia game, right? Like guys like Jordan Clark showed out all season long. And then if you want to go year prior, Thomas Harper, transfer from Oklahoma State that no one was really talking about. Really productive nickel at Notre Dame. Javonte Jean-Baptiste was a backup defensive end at Ohio State, was arguably Notre Dame's best defensive lineman in his one and only season with the Irish. So Notre Dame goes out, they get guys who don't have quite the star power. You know, not everyone is like Riley Leonard, right? But then they get these underrated players and they thrive at Notre Dame. They don't have to make splashy moves. They have to make smart moves. And in the era of portal chaos, smart wins. And Notre Dame got exactly what it needed and made this 2025 roster better immediately based on what they got in the transfer portal. And even though the portal moves look good on paper, I think they say even more about the program as a whole. So coming up next, we're going to talk about why Notre Dame is quietly building something elite. So now that we've gone through all the specifics and we looked at the additions compared to the departures, and it's pretty clear that Notre Dame came out a winner in the transfer portal, but it's not just about who they brought in and what they lost, right? Because if you look at any of the winners and losers articles in the transfer portal, you're probably not going to see Notre Dame in there because I think I looked at they're the 56th ranked transfer portal class. That doesn't even make sense, but so much of that has to do with the amount of guys that you bring in. And considering Notre Dame brought in 8 guys, they're just not going to be at the top of any of those lists. But it doesn't matter, right? Because it's not just about who came and went. It's about what this cycle says about the program's identity because they just went to the national championship. And at the beginning there, it felt like maybe there was going to be some serious turnover on this roster. And you look at some of the other top programs around the country, they deal with massive turnover every single offseason. But Notre Dame managed to avoid it in the winter, and then after spring practice, they were able to avoid it again. They just didn't really lose that many guys. Losing 2 guys in the spring transfer portal window is honestly shocking. I thought they would lose more because there was backups like, guys in the roster who aren't going to contribute a ton this season on offense or defense. Maybe they'll have a role on special teams. And you're thinking like, a guy like Preston Zinter, right? Awesome player on special teams at Notre Dame. Is a good linebacker. He could start at other Power 4 schools. I don't really see a path to playing time for him on the Notre Dame defense this year unless guys get hurt. Now, guys could get hurt. We certainly saw that last year. But a guy like him, he elects to stay at Notre Dame. And obviously, the power of the Notre Dame degree is important. Notre Dame goes out and they recruit players with the 440 concept in mind. So these guys want to come in. Most of them want to come in and get their degree. And a lot of these guys are a year or 2 in. They're closer to getting that degree. And maybe, like in Steve Angeli's case, once they get it, they leave. But I just thought there'd be more guys who wanted to play college football, or maybe the money was right somewhere else, and that just didn't happen. And they're also not losing a ton of coaches. And I will say every single year, you are probably going to lose a few assistant coaches that you don't want to lose. Like nobody wanted to lose Al Golden, right? He just won the Broyles Award. He's the best defensive coordinator in college football. Now he's off to the NFL to be the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. And then other than him, they only lost Dylan McCullough. And then they replaced Dylan McCullough with Jaywan Sider, who is one of the best running back coaches in all of college football. So it's not that they're just, they're not losing players. They're not losing cultures. They're retaining players. They're retaining coaches. They're retaining culture. And I think players and coaches and personnel people stay because the foundation is strong. Now, you are going to lose people like Chad Bowden as well, but I think people want to play for Marcus Freeman. They want to coach for him. And then once they're here and they get to work in South Bend with this team and everyone else involved with the program, they don't want to leave. And I think that says a lot about the people who are in charge, not just at the top of the football program, but Pete Vavakwa, everyone in the athletic department. Like, this is the first time in a long time, and it's not just starting today, right? But it feels like everyone is in lockstep. The football program, the athletic department, and the university officials, everyone is working together now. It was not always the case, and I think, Brian Kelly used to talk about that all the time, and he probably played a role in that too, with just his general personality and the way that he treated people. But it's so great to see Notre Dame working together to get this football program where they need to be. And I think the fact that they went to the national championship under Marcus Freeman in year 3 was proof of concept. And now he's already a very likable guy, and it seems like everyone is rowing in the same direction, everyone, including those in charge of NIL at Notre Dame, because we cannot bury the lead here. Notre Dame has a lot of NIL money, and they might not have, the same amount of flash as like a Miami or even Ohio State, who made it public that they had a $20 million roster. But don't get it twisted. Notre Dame is certainly paying their players. They have one of the most organized and efficient NIL collectives. They actually have 2 NIL collectives in all of college football. They're not in the top 5, but they're not outside the top 10. They just don't overpay. They retain and they attract talent that fits the system, and that's a big reason why you're not seeing these mass exodus or these holdouts or these starters who are leaving because they can get more money elsewhere. They feel supported at Notre Dame and they can get developed at Notre Dame, and that's a big reason why a lot of these guys ended up staying. Guys look around for extra money. It happened with Notre Dame's roster, but Notre Dame also has the ability to pay these guys if they deserve it. Now, if there's a backup who isn't going to start and they can get paid a lot more at another school, like the offensive lineman I was talking about earlier, then it just makes more sense for those guys to leave, take that money, and also get the playing time. But I honestly think Notre Dame's NIL and the way that they structure it and the way that they operate, it's very similar to Ohio State's. And I think that we all got caught up in the $20 million number last year, but Ohio State puts a lot of focus on paying their guys. Like, they paid Jack Sawyer to come back for one more year. They paid JT Tuimoloau money to come back and play. And they paid other guys on the team, veterans, to come back for one more ride. They ended up winning the national championship. And then when they want to fill gaps, they're going to go out and pay a Quinshon Judkins. And if they have a chance to get the highest rated recruit in the country, they're going to do that with Jeremiah Smith. And they do have a little bit more money to spend than Notre Dame does. But I think their strategy, like, they're not overpaying guys. They're not getting in these top recruiting classes and then watching everyone leave, like what happened at Miami or what happened at Texas A&M. Like, they're very efficient too. That's why they just won the national championship, because they get guys out of high school, they develop them, and they retain them. And I think that is what Notre Dame is trying to build under Marcus Freeman, and they've already built it to some extent. Now they're just continuing to develop and evolve over time, and I think Marcus Freeman and his staff are building from the inside out. You're seeing that with young talent come in like CJ Carr, Kingston Viliamu-Asa, big-time recruits who are ready to shine at Notre Dame, and then they go out into the transfer portal, and then they fill gaps, and then they just hit on a lot of these guys. Like, even though RJ Oben, I would think when you look at what he did last year collectively, probably didn't hit in the way that Notre Dame wanted, but still came through in one of the biggest moments of the year. And you compare that to just so many other programs like Florida or Arkansas, and even Blue Bloods like Alabama. They lost a few starters. Georgia loses dozens of guys every year. West Virginia lost like 30 guys in the spring portal window. Cal has lost like 35. And you just look at what Notre Dame is dealing with. They lose 2 guys in the spring portal. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, this is nice. Because, like, in an era where programs are constantly putting out fires, Notre Dame's transfer portal cycle was refreshingly boring. And that's exactly why it was a massive success. So now we can close the book on the transfer portal cycle at Notre Dame for a while. Now, of course, now that I say that, there's going to be a graduate transfer who ends up leaving just because I did this whole segment. So knock on wood. Like I said at the beginning, if you are a graduate transfer, if you have your degree, you could technically enter the portal at any time. But I feel like Notre Dame is pretty much done here. Maybe there's a straggler or two, but I am looking forward to taking a break from the transfer portal for a little bit because it's not always the most fun thing to talk about other than when Notre Dame is going out there and making big-time additions. But that is going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with Luke Smith. We're going to wrap up the spring and start looking ahead to the summer. And in the meantime, make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. Also, as a reminder, you every single episode, if you're watching along on YouTube, make sure you like this video below. And if you're listening to the podcast, you like what you heard today, rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. Greatly appreciate all the support. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.